I'm going to try in 35 or 40 minutes to talk in the context not just of climate change, but the other two big problems that many of us refer to these days as the triple crunch. So the financial crisis and the coming energy crisis, because these three things are hugely related. And it's very often that you hear analyses done absent consideration of the other two mega problems. So the three massive problems, not the only three that we have as a society, of course, but three that are connected and have a lot to do with the dramas that'll play out in the energy arena. So here's some foreshots from Copenhagen. So what I'm going to do is offer a few comments, not in any great detail, on the summit. I think most people, if you're interested enough to come to this, you would have been interested enough to follow the daily news reports from Copenhagen. But then what I'm going to do is work through my vision, if you like, of the solar revolution and how I think it's going to unfold, and it still is going to unfold, even if this negotiating session process stays off the rails, and how it's been impacted by the kinds of dynamics that went on in Copenhagen. So let's just start, for those of you who don't know these processes, perhaps, I mean, vast negotiating chambers with thousands of diplomats from well over 150 countries. Of course, the heads of state off in private rooms trying to broker last-minute deals and always looking to spin them as great success stories, even if they're manifestly not. And that happened in Copenhagen, and I think as we spread the blame, clearly President Obama, unfortunately, has quite a bit of that to carry, because he went off and briefed the White House press corps before most of the world leaders even knew what the details of the accord supposedly were. And then the pictures on the right that you won't be able to see too clearly are the protesters. I mean, tens of thousands of protesters. People had traveled from all over the world to express their hopes for a positive outcome, a treaty with teeth, something that would move us beyond the end of the period of covered by the negotiations in Kyoto, and that hasn't happened, of course. Many of these people were of the age where they're going to have to live with the consequences. I went on a couple of the demonstrations, waving my copy of the Financial Times, and the most of the people there were 19-year-olds. And I think as we think through all the social implications of what goes on, I won't elaborate on this, it's the subject of another lecture, but I think we all need to be aware of it. Those 19-year-olds anguished rightly about climate change, protesting with almost no exceptions at all, in an utterly peaceful way, were treated by a paramilitary police force with great violence and complete contempt, carted off by the 100 in buses to be lined up as though it was surprising they didn't have orange suits on, with their hands tied together on a freezing cold ground for 4 hours. Deeply worrying for those of us who are interested in policing and how that relates to society in efforts to face up to some of the kind of stresses we have. Bear with me as I show you pictures of two delegations. The Chinese delegation there, hard at work on the last night. And the delegation at the bottom, of course, is the American delegation, where they know the house is burning and a lot of posing goes on nonetheless. So having got that off my chest, let me just say one thing about climate change and the future that we're on. This is an artist's impression, more dark than usual on the left-hand side, of a road going nowhere, fossil fuel dependent, a world descending into the impacts of global warming, and the images you see on the right, this is a separate presentation, of course, are already impacts that we're beginning to see unfold. So droughts, paradoxically, floods, capable of wiping out the produce of entire states within nations, in the case of some places in the developing world, even national economies for the year. And of course, increasingly, wildfires, which haven't made it into cities yet, but that becomes ever more likely in the kind of world we're teeing up for ourselves. And these kinds of things are just the first faint footprint of what we can expect if we believe the merest fraction of what all the governments are being told, and I mean all of them. Those of us who feel that we work on the front lines of the survival industries buoy ourselves with the thought that, as you see on the right in another artist's impression, there is an alternative future, and it's a future that can be fashioned with technologies that exist today and are in fast-growing markets often today, much less what can be done with the type of development that's going forward. Just a few more words about the qualification to do this. As our chairman said, I've had 3 careers, and so I've seen sort of both sides of the track, really. First career exploring for oil in Baluchistan in 1984. I really pretty much was a creature of that industry. I taught at Imperial College, but worked a lot with the oil companies. I worked on oil source rocks, particularly, and that time funded by BP and Shell and others. But my research was on the history of the oceans, and that's how I switched to become an environmental campaigner, because I was worried by what I felt I could read in the geological record about what was being said about the climate system based on the top-down computer modeling done by atmospheric physicists in the 1980s. So there you see me in Spain in 1992 tooling around in an oil spill, but mostly what I did was work on the climate negotiations. And these days, as they say, now for something completely different, working in solar energy, and these are Solarcentury trade stands in different places around Europe, and we do roof tiles, bespoke elements of buildings. Our business is trying to turn buildings into power plants, electric, and to a degree thermal. So, let's go through a survival checklist of the types of things that you would want to be able to do if you were going to honestly say that you were having a good crack at growing a company, a technology, as part of that survival set of technologies. Now, let me emphasize very strongly that I don't think solar is a magic bullet. There are no magic bullets. And there's a big family of technologies that I think qualify for the world survival. The clean tech family probably has more than 50 different technologies now and industries that are of interest to investors. That's what our Silicon Valley investors say. More than 50 species that they're interested in. And we're just a couple of those. So I'm going to try and persuade you in the next 20 minutes or so that all these boxes can be ticked. Carbon savings all the way down to bonus things that come through the attributes of renewables that are useful for fashioning a society that's not just using energy well in a low carbon way, but also addressing some of its other problems because of the inherent capabilities of renewable energy. So let's start with carbon saving. That's obviously vital for the Copenhagen process, and here you see 15,000 tons saved from a 10 megawatt each year from a 10 megawatt plant. Interestingly, in Abu Dhabi, just in passing, you might want to notice, if you didn't know this, that they're going for solar big time in Abu Dhabi, and you'd say, why is that? That's an oil country. Answer, they're scared of running out of gas or not having enough gas to do what they need to do. Right up to the other end of the spectrum, here's a roof on a 2-up, 2-down in Richmond. That's where I lived for a whole year with that roof, and we generated more my daughter and I generated more electricity than we used, with pretty much permanent occupancy all through the year with just that tiny roof. But of course, we had to have A-grade lights and appliances, really top of the range energy efficiency to do that.